Friends, we are here again for our adult Bible study. We're rocking and rolling through the life of Jesus. Depending on which gospel you're in, Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, we're either a little way through, most of the way through, part way through. I believe that if we're following Luke's plan, which we mostly have been for the last few weeks. If you are in the neighborhood of about Luke 6, we're going to pick up there, but actually it's mostly going to end up being in Matthew 5. So, because we're going to start looking today at two sermons, I've written it up on the board here. Jesus has two long sermons recorded. One is called the Sermon on the Mount. The other one is called the Sermon on the Plain, which I hadn't heard it called that before, but apparently lots of people do. The Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5 through 7. The Sermon on the Plain is in Luke chapter 6 and a little bit over in Luke chapter 11. So we'll talk about that just a little bit, and then we'll try to get into the beginning of Matthew 5 and the Beatitudes. So both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain are delivered, and that's Plain, not a block plane or an airplane. Just make sure.
Mine says level place.
Yes, a level place. Which could be either a plane or a plane would work. The Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain both occur early in Jesus' ministry, in the leading edge of it. He delivers these messages with new disciples and with large crowds of disciples present. And the two sermons really sort of lay out the basics of the life of someone who's trying to honor God. We would call those people a Christian. Jesus would not have called those people a Christian. But the basics of the spiritual life of a follower of Jesus. And these messages are super important for the people who heard it, either on the side of the mountain or on the level place. And they are also very important for us as well, 20 some centuries later. But there are some differences. For example, the Sermon on the Mount is given primarily to a Jewish audience that Jesus was attempting to avoid by going up on the side of the mountain. He's trying to get away from people. And they followed him, and he had compassion. He saw that they needed to hear from him. And so he begins to talk and lays out the basics of obedience to God. In Matthew 5, 6, and 7, there is an emphasis on a person's spiritual life, which is reflected in their actions and outcomes. The content works to try to reform the spiritual attitude of Christians. Here's how you ought to feel and think about this. It's not enough to just say, I haven't murdered anybody, but if you say, I hate you, you moron, that's just as bad. Okay, so it's about attitudes. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 inspire people to live a godly life. The Sermon on the Plain, however, Jesus preached after a night of praying on a mountainside, and then a morning spent choosing his 12 disciples. That's in Luke chapter 6, which we talked about those 12 disciples last night. He delivered his sermon on level ground, on a plain, probably just north there of the little town of Bethsaida. And the message is grounded in real life issues the overall message is for Christians to follow Christ's example of performing kind, generous actions to those who are less fortunate in life. Take care of the poor. Take care of those who are in need. Luke records the Sermon on the Plain for more of a Gentile audience. He is a Gentile. He is writing towards Gentiles for them. And so he records things a little differently. They obviously wouldn't be as familiar with Jewish law, and they would need some more practical application. Now, what does it really look like if you're going to follow Jesus? They do share material. The Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. They both lay out this code of conduct. This is the way we ought to behave. But if you compare the two, the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, about a third of the material is found in both. Not all, but a third of it's a pretty good chunk. So over the next however long it takes us to get through all of this preaching, we'll kind of go back and forth between where we started in Luke 6. We've hit the selection of the 12 apostles, and then Jesus begins to teach there. But we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 5. To start with the Beatitudes. This first section, verses 1 through 14 in Matthew 5, is known as the Beatitudes. That comes from a Latin word that means happy or blessed. Now, I believe it was Robert Schuller that, probably 25 or 30 years ago, maybe even more now, I kind of lose track, but he wrote a book called The Be Happy Attitudes, which is cute and, sort of vomit-inducing. Because
Too sweet.
yeah, that's pretty drippy. These verses have nothing to do with what we typically talk about, what we mean when we talk about being happy. Happy is, hey, look, there's cake. Or I don't have to file my taxes. Or, I'm arsenic free. I found $20 in my pocket. Or, whatever. That sort of happiness is very circumstance based. I'm happy because nothing sucky or bad has happened today. Woohoo!
Now I just need to get out of bed.
Yeah. It's what Jesus talks about here. These Beatitudes are far beyond like emotion, way beyond the sort of situational, smiley blissfulness that we normally think about with happiness. To be blessed, to be happy, as Jesus talks about here in Matthew 5, has to do with a person's well-being. It is a distinctive spiritual joy for those who share in the salvation of the kingdom. Can somebody who is not a Christian experience this kind of joy? I would say not exactly. They can have good days, but they cannot know the peace and the joy that come from knowing that Jesus is in control, and that we are bound for heaven. One of the people that I stole from said, to be blessed is to have God's kingdom in your heart.
Amen.
The blessed ones are those who are in the world, but who are independent of it. Knowing that satisfaction comes from God and not just from sweet, favorable circumstances. That's really what these first few verses are all about. If you really want to know blessing, happiness, joy, satisfaction, it really can only be found in a relationship with God. So let's read through these first few verses. Matthew 5 verse 1 says, "Now when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.'" And we'll stop there. So let's take just a minute to consider each of these blessings that God has for his children. The first of the Beatitudes is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What do you think it means to be poor in spirit? You haven't got very much of the Holy Spirit in you? What's it mean to be poor in spirit?
Well, that's what on the surface that's kind of looks like it, doesn't it?
If someone is poor in spirit, they are not spiritually proud. They're not spiritually self-sufficient. They don't believe they've got it all sewn up and taken care of. They recognize that they have a need for God. They have an understanding of their failure to meet God's standards. They're not all puffed up and excited about who they are and what they're doing. They are instead realizing that they must have more of God, more of his divine spirit in their life. Because if they don't, they're left to try to meet God's standards on their own. Really, I suppose it is kind of a confession, a little bit, of one's own sinfulness. I'm poor in spirit because I am really not a good human being. And I need more of God in my life to overcome the effects of sin. What is it that Jesus promises to the poor in spirit?
Heaven.
Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And we believe, preach, teach that that's true. That those who cry out to God will receive heaven as a free gift. It's not something that is earned. It is not something that is bought. It is not something that is deserved. In classical Greek, the word for poor that Jesus uses here meant a beggar. They are beggars in spirit. They come hat in hand, asking God to please give them exactly what it is that they need. It's kind of an interesting image.
Well, don't we do that sometimes?
Well, I would hope so. I would hope that we do it all the time. That we recognize that on our own, we are incapable of pleasing God, measuring up to God, meeting His expectations. We'll never be pure, we'll never be holy, we'll never be righteous. And so we come to Him saying, I need this from you. You must give it to me, or I won't find it any place else. To be poor in spirit is a realization that you have nothing without God. And so you come to Him and ask for what He provides, and He gives the kingdom of heaven. He brings eternity as a gift to you. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Any other thoughts or comments about that? Everybody's awfully bashful today. Okay, what's the next one? Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So when Jesus says this, is he talking about everybody who stands in the funeral home and beside a casket? Those who have experienced the loss of a loved one?
Yeah.
Well,
Them too, but not just.
we know that he brings comfort. I can never remember if it's the beginning of 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians where I can't even say that now. My brain is not working.
We do not grieve as those.
What?
Is that the one?
Well, there is that thought, but I was thinking more about that God is the God of all comfort, and He comforts us so that we can turn around and give that same comfort to others who are in need of comfort. Maybe it's Colossians. There's a CO in it somewhere. That's about all I can do. That's about all I can do today. But it's like in the first chapter of one of Paul's letters. I didn't think about this when I was putting the notes together. I would have written it down. It is absolutely true that when we experience a great loss, when we are grieving, that God does give us comfort in ways that other people don't experience. In my first ministry in Francisville, the church is on this corner and the funeral home was across the street. And so it kind of felt like I was at the funeral home in a little town of 1,000 people. You go to the funeral home a lot more often than you do in the big city. I felt like I was always there. And it was always pretty obvious as you walked into the mortuary which people had a relationship with Jesus. Because if people didn't have a connection to Christ, sometimes they were just absolutely devastated and blown away and inconsolable. And I would stand in the line waiting to go through and greet people and just think, especially when it was a tragic loss, like a kid or a teenager or a young mom or something, like how in the world does anybody ever get through this without the comfort and the strength that God can bring? So it is absolutely true that God does that for those who have experienced loss. But I think Jesus is talking about more than that.
2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4.
That sounds about right. 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. What does it say there about comfort?
Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with comfort which we ourselves are comforted by God.
We're comforted by God, so we can turn around and give his comfort to other people because we've experienced it. I think that Jesus, though, is talking not just about those who have experienced a great loss. The sadness and the sorrow of those who mourn, again, I think has to do more with sin. Psalm 119, verse 136 says, "Streams of tears flow from my eyes, for your law is not obeyed." It's mourning over the sins of the nation, of the people. God will bring comfort and aid. He'll bring encouragement. He will bring help. And I would say that Jesus is the answer to all those prayers that have been prayed by those whose hearts have broken over the sin of their people. Those who are mourning call out for God's hand, and God has answered that call in Christ Jesus. I wrote down some note at some point along with this beatitude that says, "Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal." Thomas More. Not sure who Thomas More is anymore, but he's the one who wrote those words. Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal. And certainly the healing that Jesus as the Son of God and the Messiah is able to bring. Those who mourn over sin, their own sin, their family sin, their nation's sin, will be comforted because of what Jesus can bring. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. I believe anytime I've preached or taught about meekness, I have, at least in the last few years, have pointed out that meekness is not the same thing as weakness. Usually, if we talk about somebody who's being sort of meek and mild, kind of mousy, milk toasty, vanilla-ish, they're really not very powerful. But this word, meekness, has much more to do with strength than it would appear. But it is strength that is under control. I want to say that it's the same word that is used like with a stallion or a bull that is on a lead rope, that there is immense power and speed and strength there, but it is being controlled on a halter or one of those nose rings or something. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. They have strength that is surrendered to God and a new birth experience. Meekness is a disposition before God of humility. Again, it's not that you never get angry, but you get angry at just the right time. It is power and strength, but with gentleness and control. The meek will receive a new promised land. In Psalm 37, verse 11, it says, "The meek will inherit the land and enjoy great peace." That's very different from the world's view that it is the rich and the famous and the powerful and the strong who will inherit all that the world has to offer. Those people may be great influencers and have a lot of impact, but Jesus says that it is those who have God's strength and power under control with gentleness, that those are the ones who will inherit the earth. Next one. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. if somebody is hungering and thirsting for righteousness, they are showing their strong desire to become more like Christ Jesus. In Isaiah 55, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why spend money on what is not bread, and your labor on what does not satisfy? Listen to me and eat what is good, and your soul will delight in the richest of fare." These are people who are longing deeply for justice for the people around them. They are longing for personal righteousness. And Jesus says that they will be satisfied. Seeking for God's goodness and God's righteousness is going to bring God's goodness and God's righteousness. If we seek God, isn't there some verse that says, if when we seek him with all of our hearts, we'll find him?
I don't know, ask the pastor.
Well, before I quote it and get it wrong, I'll just make sure that it's right, because sometimes my notes are faulty.
It might be in Jeremiah. I'm pretty sure it's all pastor.
Jeremiah 29, verse 12. "You will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and bring you back from captivity." How do we find him? How do we find God?
Seek.
By going after him with all of our heart and mind and soul, being hungry and thirsty and not being satisfied until we find what we're looking for. Jesus talks about people who desire to do God's will from their hearts, and anything that is unrighteous makes them homesick for the justice of God's presence in heaven. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled with that righteousness. Okay? Thoughts or questions before we go on? Next one, which I believe is number 5. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Jesus is talking here about an attitude of forgiveness. There is a distinction that's been made. I don't know if it really always holds water. But the distinction between mercy and grace. Mercy is when I go to court and I stand in front of the judge and I confess my guilt. I did it. I'm absolutely guilty of what I've been charged with. And the judge says, "You're free to go."
Not getting what you deserve.
What do I deserve? 25 years to life. What am I going to get? Freedom. That's mercy. Not getting the just punishment for my actions. Consequences are removed. Grace is going to the judge, standing before the judge, confessing your sin, and he says, "Hey, how about a pony and some cake too?" going home and finding out that everybody has come to your house and they've all brought a gift. It's getting blessing that you don't deserve.
Unmerited favors.
God's unmerited favor. The other nice little thing is God's riches at Christ's expense. Grace. All of God's favor, all of God's blessing is made available to us, not because of what we've done, but because of God's own goodness and because of what Jesus has done for us. Again, I don't know, like if you were going to have a semantics showdown somewhere, if you can really draw the line so clearly between grace and mercy. We usually talk about them together, but one is not getting what you deserve, and one is getting what you don't deserve. I'm a big fan of both of those things. Okay, Jesus says that those who are merciful will be shown mercy. I'm going to give to you, well, I'm not going to give to you what you deserve. Why? Because I forgive you. You punched me. I have every right to punch you back. But I'm going to forgive you, and I'm not going to do it.
What was your thing on grace?
God's riches
Riches.
at Christ's expense. James 2 verse 13 says, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful, because mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. It's about being compassionate. It's not just something that you think about, but your actions are involved as well. I think meekness plays into mercifulness a little bit. We see our own mistakes and faults, and we offer forgiveness to others as such. We recognize that we are all imperfect, that none of us is righteous, none of us is good, none of us is holy. And so, because we're all in this together, we extend mercy. At a church I was a part of that went through a survey of spiritual gifts. That's been a long, long time ago. And not here. Only one man out of all the elders and ministers had any kind of a score when it came to mercy. Like, wow, that's kind of surprising and also kind of scary. That the majority of the leaders of the congregation didn't have mercifulness as kind of a leading quality. Are we exempt from showing mercy because we don't score very high on it? No. It may not come to us naturally, but we still need to show God's mercy. We want to receive it from God. We know we're in desperate need of it, and so we had better be sure to extend that same mercy to others. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy by others and by God. Okay, what's the next one? Blessed are the pure in heart. And what will they get?
They will see God.
Those who are pure of heart strive every day for clean living, to be clean of the pollution and the guilt of sin. At the center of their being, in their mind, their will and emotions, they are sincere and upright. They have this inner moral purity. It is a heart that is undistracted from doing God's will. They have clarity about who they are and what they do. They have a single-minded focus. I want to do what God has called me to do. That is not something that is slapped around on the outside of their bodies. That is something that is buried and planted deep inside them. It's what drives them to be pure in heart. And because they have God's purity, the promise is that they will see God themselves. In Psalm 24, it says, "Who may ascend the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to an idol or swear by what is false." How do we get to see God? By having clean hands and a pure heart, not being guilty of sin. And again, we know that the only way we can have that cleansed soul and have a pure heart is through what Jesus does. Psalm 73 verse 1 says, "Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart." There's blessing there. Even in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, "Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord." And we have to have an interior change. Jesus has to cleanse us and purify us and purge that selfishness away from us, because unless he's done that, we cannot see God. Blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God. Next one. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God." When I hear the word peacemaker, I think about one of two things: either a handgun or a missile.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Peacemaker Colt.
Is Jesus calling his followers to take up arms, to lock and load, to be packing heat all the time? Well, we'll calm this right down now. Okay? No.
Don't think that's what he had in mind.
No. Literally, Jesus says that those who make peace will be known as God's children. There's a difference between keeping peace and making peace. Keeping peace is, locked and loaded, standing in the corner, ready for somebody to get a little too rowdy, and then you just knock them down. That's keeping the peace. That's, what the UN forces do all over the world. They show up with their guns, and hopefully everybody will behave. But to make peace is something very different. My friend Bill Putman, several years ago, tried to get me to understand the difference, because I don't like conflict. I want everybody to just get along. I don't want there to be fighting and fussing between people, but I'm also unwilling to work towards resolution. Let's just pretend that it's not there. Let's just all act like there's not a problem, and there won't be a problem.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's keeping peace. Bill, and more importantly, Jesus, say that we should be making peace by resolving conflict that happens between us. In Romans 12:18, Paul says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." It's my job. It is incumbent upon me to try to make things right. If somebody is upset with me, somebody is angry at me, somebody has something against me, because I am a follower of Jesus, and because it does depend on me, I will try to go and make it right. James says in chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, "The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. And then he says, peacemakers who sow in peace raise a harvest of righteousness. Working towards peace, settling differences, resolving issues, James says, raises a harvest of righteousness. They're not just pretending like everything is okay, but they really are working to resolve issues. The peace that these people have with God, it's where it starts. I'm at peace with God, and so now I can live at peace with others. It works its way out of us into our other relationships. These kind of people are spreaders of the good news of peace that is available with God and from God. Isaiah 52 verse 7 says, how beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. We'll actually sing that song in a couple weeks on Easter morning. Peacemakers will be called sons of God because they are just like him. God is one who brings resolution to conflict. We can only have real peace with everybody else if we have God's peace. I haven't seen it for a while, but there used to be the little stickers on the back of people's station wagons. N-O, God, N-O, peace, K-N-O-W, God, K-N-O-W, peace.
Oh, yeah.
It's absolutely true. Without a relationship with God, there will never be any real lasting peace. One of the reasons why stuff has gone on in the Middle East for the last 6,000 years is because there isn't an agreement on who God is and what he expects. If everybody was following the same God there, I'm not saying it would be an automatic peace, but it would be a lot easier to get to if everybody agreed that we're following the same God. We are listening to his will. We are being led by his Spirit. And until that happens, people are just going to pick and fight. They just will. All right. I think that brings us down to verse, 13? 10. Oh, my.
Persecuted for righteousness.
Oh, yeah, there we are. Okay. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus says that people who are persecuted for faith, and especially people who are persecuted because of their desire to follow him, that this persecution affords an opportunity for people to show their fit in God's kingdom, maybe their fitness in God's kingdom. If we're living according to Jesus's plan, if we really are trying to be pure and holy and righteous, we will be offensive to the rest of the world. And the world always attacks things that it doesn't understand or like. I think that's the nature of people, and has been for a very long time. I don't understand you. You're different. And so I will belittle you and mock you, and I will abuse you and hurt you, and if given the opportunity, I may eliminate you because you're different and you don't fit in. Living according to Jesus's plan makes us not fit in. It offends people who are around us. Where do you get off with this idea? You're so intolerant. You're so judgmental. You're so harsh. Like that's really not where I'm coming from. I'm not being harsh and judgmental. What I believe is what God has laid out. If you have a problem with my position, you don't have a problem with me. You have a problem with God. He's the one who is intolerant of sin. He's not intolerant of you. He's intolerant of sinful behavior, sinful attitudes. When we are persecuted because of our commitment to God's ways and God's will, Jesus says that we are blessed. It identifies us. It puts us into a special category of people who have also been persecuted for their faith because of their adherence to God's will and God's ways. 1 Peter 3 says, "For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." Who's going to harm you if you're eager to do good? Actually, lots of people. "But even if you should suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear what they fear. Do not be frightened." Suffering for righteousness, suffering for all the right reasons, identifies us with the prophets, Jesus says, but it also identifies us with Jesus. He suffered unjustly. If we suffer for him, that makes us just like him. I made a reference a couple weeks ago in the newsletter to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's a German pastor back in the 30s in Nazi Germany. He wrote in the last century, "Discipleship means allegiance to the suffering Christ, and it is therefore not at all surprising that Christians should be called upon to suffer. In fact, it is a joy and a token of his grace." If we are called to suffer, if we have the opportunity to suffer because of our faith, because of Jesus, Bonhoeffer says, and Jesus as well, that it identifies us with him. It is a joy, not something to be avoided, but something to be accepted, and maybe even can be a blessing to us. I'm going through this, and it identifies me not just with prophets who have suffered before, but it identifies me with Jesus himself.
Embrace it.
There is a passage written by Paul that says that the followers of Jesus will be persecuted for their faith. Period. Every follower of Christ should expect to suffer for their faith somewhere along the way. You don't get the promotion because of your faith. You won't work on a weekend. You're not willing to cook the books. You're not willing to turn a blind eye to something shady that's going on, because you are committed to living a life of purity and holiness and righteousness and integrity. So you don't get the job.
So it's not just death.
Yeah,
That's what I was thinking.
this is not necessarily having your head lopped off because because of your faith in Jesus. Not even necessarily being arrested or tortured for faith, although it does happen all over the world to people because of their faith in Jesus. But relationships with family, jobs, there are all sorts of ways that we can suffer for our faith. Because we are committed to following Jesus, there are certain things that we cannot and will not and should not do. And the world doesn't understand that. Well, why don't you just do this? Well, because it's wrong. will be made fun of, we may lose a job, we may lose a friendship, we may lose a marriage, we may lose a relationship with children. There could be lots of different outcomes.
Thank you for drawing me. You're taking back my yard because I'm not on the Mormon side of the street. Does that make sense? Yeah. Gee.
Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay. This seems like a really good place to put a stopper in there. I would remind you that if there's anything you'd like to go back and listen to again, that you can always do that on my YouTube channel. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, make a comment, would you? Let me know that you're there. If you subscribe to the channel, click the little bell down there in the corner, the rectangle. Every time I post something new, you'll be notified of it. It's not because I'm looking for more followers, because I believe that I am, like at 80 subscribers already, so I'm kind of a big deal. AJ asks me all the time, Dad, how many YouTube subscribers do you have? Like, I think it's 85. So do you get money for that? No, I believe I have to have like 1 million followers in order to make any money on this deal. So anyway, thanks for being a part of our study this morning. We'll pick up again next time, finishing up the rest of chapter 5, and we'll move on with the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks for being here.